All right, it's Tuesday and it's prayer day, and I've already prayed for the concerns we picked up in church, and then some in the bulletin, and some extra ones that I have that came in on the side. So I want to have a quick lesson with us today about how we need to see our service to one another, and how sometimes we are asked to go, against what the culture tells us to do. Matthew 7, verse 9, Jesus asks this question: Is there any among you who, if your child would ask for bread, you would give them a stone? Or if your child would ask for a fish, you would give them snakes? Well, that's sort of my topic today, is what is it that that we're supposed to give to others? In our service, what is it that we are supposed to provide? Well, in construction, one of the things that seems to happen pretty regular, and it is an irritant to everybody, is a piece of sawdust getting in your eye. I've had them in my eyes, and most everybody that's worked around construction very long has had a piece of sawdust in their eye. So I'm going to go through a couple of things here that might represent how the world would ask us to deal with people who have struggles and have things in their life that they'd like to work on. So let's say one of my workers comes to me and he says, I got a piece of sawdust in my eye. So I open up the eye and I look in there and I say, yeah, I see that piece of sawdust in there, but don't worry about it. Everybody gets a piece of sawdust in their eye. How about if I look in his eye and I see that piece of sawdust and I say, well, yeah, I see that piece of sawdust in your eye, but hey, it wasn't your fault that that piece of sawdust went in your eye, so I wouldn't worry about it. I look in his eye and I say, hey, you know what, you got a big piece of sawdust in your eye, but it's nobody else's business but yours. It's your eye, so I'm not going to worry about it. Of course, the best one that the world would like us to tell others about their life is when they come to me or us and we look in their eye and we see a piece of sawdust, we simply say, oh, I wouldn't worry about it. Don't beat yourself up over it. It's not your fault. Everybody gets sawdust in their eyes. But there is another approach. I can look in that man's eye and I can see that piece of sawdust in there, and I can think about the sawdust I've had in my eye and how much of a relief it was and how good it was to get that piece of sawdust out. And I can look in his eye and I can see that piece of sawdust and I can say, yes, you have a piece of sawdust in there, and that piece of sawdust needs to come out. I'm telling you from my own experience, you will feel much better if we get that piece of sawdust out. The world would ask us to tell people who have sawdust in their eye that everything's okay, that everybody has sawdust in their eye from time to time, and it's really nobody's business but theirs, and that they shouldn't beat themselves up over the sawdust in their eye. If they have something in their life that is causing them pain or suffering or to not grow in the right way, we're supposed to say to them, well, that's just your business. That's not anybody else's business. But there is another way. We can say, I had a piece of sawdust in my eye. Or I had things in my life that made life bad or made life uncomfortable or made life work in the wrong direction. And I can tell you from experience that when I got that piece of sawdust out of my life, I felt a lot better. And there's some very, very serious pieces of sawdust that get in our eye that only Jesus can take out. There are there are times in our life when we know that there's something there that has to be removed. And it would be quite a disservice for someone to come to me and say, I have a piece of sawdust in my eye, and I didn't offer them the information they needed to get that piece of sawdust out. That's what we need to offer people. We don't need to make people feel good about the life they're living. We need to offer them the strength to live a life that they can feel good about. I'll see you in church Sunday.